Part 12 of Ultima Thule. This librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Karen Savage. Ultima Thule by Mack Reynolds. Part 12. The old man looked at him, and there seemed to be a very faint bitterness, politely suppressed.
I wouldn't say we planned them, comrade. Certainly not we of the older generation. But the trend toward change is already to be seen by anyone who wishes to look, and our institutions won't long be able to stand. But of course, if you're from United Planets, you would know more of this than I.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
You are indeed new on Kropotkin, the old man said. Just a moment.
He went into his house and emerged with a small power pack. He indicated it to Ronny Bronston.
This is our destruction, he said.
The Section G agent shook his head, bewildered. The old-timer sat down again.
My son, he said, runs the farm now. 6 months ago he traded one of our colts for a small pump powered by one of these. It was little use on my part to argue against the step. The pump eliminates considerable work at the well and in irrigation.
Ronny still didn't understand.
The power pack is dead now, the old man said, and my son needs a new one.
They're extremely cheap, Ronny said. An industrialized planet turns them out in multi-million amounts at practically no cost.
We have little with which to trade. A few handicrafts at most.
Ronny said, But good heavens, man, build yourselves a plant to manufacture the power packs. With a population this small, a factory employing no more than 6 men could turn out all you need. The old man was shaking his head. He held up the battery.
This comes from the planet Archimedes, he said. One of the most highly industrialized in the UP, so I understand. On Archimedes, do you know how many persons it takes to manufacture this power pack?
A handful to operate the whole factory. Archimedes is fully automated. The old man was still moving his head negatively.
No. It takes the total working population of the planet. How many metals do you think are contained in it in all? I can immediately see what must be lead and copper.
Ronny said uncomfortably, Probably at least 12, some in microscopic amounts.
That's right. So we need a highly developed metallurgical industry before we can even begin. Then a developed transportation industry to take the metals to the factory. We need power to run the factory, hydroelectric, solar, or possibly atomic power. We need a tool-making industry to equip the factory, the transport industry, and the power industry. And while the men are employed in these, we need farmers to produce food for them, educators to teach them the sciences and techniques involved, and an entertainment industry to amuse them in their hours of rest. As their lives become more complicated with all this, we need a developed medical industry to keep them in health.
The old man hesitated for a moment, then said,
And above all, we need a highly complicated government to keep all this accumulation of wealth in check and balance. No. You see, my friend, it takes social labor to produce products such as this, and thus far we have avoided that on Kropotkin. In fact, it was for such avoidance that my ancestors originally came to this planet.
Ronny said, scowling, This gets ridiculous. You show me this basically simple power pack and say it will ruin your socioeconomic system. On the face of it, that's ridiculous. The old man sighed and looked out over the village unseeingly.
It's not just that single item, of course. The other day, one of my neighbors turned up with a light bulb with built-in power for a year's time. It is the envy of the unthinking persons of the neighborhood, most of whom would give a great deal for such a source of light. A nephew of mine has somehow even acquired a powered bicycle, I think you call them, from somewhere or other. One by one, item by item, these products of advanced technology turn up from whence we don't seem to be able to find out.
Under his breath, Ronny muttered,
Pain. I beg your pardon, the old man said.
Nothing, the Section G agent said. He leaned forward, and, a worried frown working its way over his face, began to question the other more closely. Afterwards, Ronny Bronston strode slowly towards the UP headquarters. There was only a small contingent of United Planets personnel on this little populated member planet, but as always, there seemed to be an office for Section G. Ronny stood outside it for a moment. There were voices from within, but he didn't knock. In fact, he cast his eyes up and down the short corridor. At the far end was a desk with a girl in the Interplanetary Cultural Exchange Department working away in concentration. She wasn't looking in his direction. Ronny Bronston put his ear to the door. The building was primitive enough, rustic enough in its construction, to permit his hearing. Tog Lee Chang-Chu was saying seriously, "Oh, it was chaotic all right, but no, I don't really believe it could have been a Tommy Paine case. Actually, I'd suggest to you that you run over to Catalina. When I was on Avalon, I heard rumors that Tommy Paine's fingers seemed to be stirring around in the mess there. Yes, I'd recommend that you take off for Catalina immediately. If Paine is anywhere in this vicinity at all, it would be Catalina." For a moment, Ronny Bronston froze. Then, in automatic reflex, his hand went inside his jacket to rest over the butt of the Model H automatic there. No, that wasn't the answer. His hand dropped away from the gun. He listened further. Another voice was saying, "We thought we were on the trail for a while on Hector, but it turned out it wasn't Paine, just a group of local agitators fed up with the communist regime there. There is going to be a bloodbath on Hector before they're through, but it doesn't seem to be Paine's work this time." Tog's voice was musing. "Well, you never know. It sounds like the sort of muck he likes to play in." The strange voice said argumentatively, "Well, Hector needs a few fundamental changes." "It could be," Tog said, "but that's their internal affairs, of course. Our job in Section G is to prevent troubles between the differing socioeconomic and religious features of member planets. Whatever we think of some of the things Paine does, our task is to get him." Ronny Bronston pushed the door open and went through. Tog Lee Chang-Chu was sitting at a desk, nonchalant and petitely beautiful as usual. Comfortably seated in easy chairs were two young men, by their attire probably citizens of United Planets, and possibly even Earthlings. "Hello, Ronny," Tog said softly. "Meet Frederick Lippman and Pedro Nazar, both Section G operatives. This is my colleague, Ronald Bronston, gentlemen. Frederick and Pedro were just leaving, Ronny." The two agents got up to shake hands. Ronny said, "You can't be in that much of a hurry. What's your assignment, boys?" Lippman, an earnest type and by his appearance not more than 25 or so years of age, began to answer, but Nazar said hurriedly, "Actually, it's a confidential assignment. We're working directly out of the Octagon." Lippman said, frowning, "It's not that confidential, Tog. Bronston's an agent too. What's your assignment, Ronny?" Ronny said very slowly, "I'm beginning to suspect that it's the same as yours, and various pieces are beginning to fall into place." Lippman was taken aback. "You mean you're looking for Tommy Paine?" His eyes went to his associate. "How could that be, Tog? I didn't know more than one of us were on this job. Why, that means if Bronston here finds him first, I won't get my permanent appointment." Ronny looked at Tog Lee Chang-Chu, who was sitting demurely, hands in lap, and a resigned expression on her face. He said, "Nor if you find him first, will I. Look here, Tog, how many men does Sid Jakes have out on this assignment?" "I wouldn't know," she said mildly. He snapped, "A few dozen or so? Or possibly a few hundred?" "It seems unlikely there could be that many," she said mildly. She looked at the other two agents. "I think you had better run along. Take my suggestion I made earlier." "Wait a minute," Ronny snapped. "You mean that they go to Catalina? That's ridiculous." Tog Lee Chang-Chu looked at Pedro Nazar, and he turned and started for the door, followed by Frederick Lippman, who was still scowling his puzzlement. "Wait a minute," Ronny snapped. "I tell you it's ridiculous, and why follow her suggestions? She's just my assistant." Pedro Nazar said, "Come on, Fred, let's get going. We'll have to pack." But Lippman wasn't having any. "His assistant?" he said to Tog Lee Chang-Chu. Tog Lee Chang-Chu's face changed expression in sudden decision. She opened her bag and brought forth a Section G identification wallet and flicked it open. The badge was gold. "I suggest you hurry," she said to the two agents. They left, and Tog turned back to Ronny, her eyebrows raised questioningly. Ronny sank down into one of the chairs recently occupied by the two other agents and tried to unravel his thoughts. He said finally, "I suppose my question should be, why do Ross Metaxa and Sid Jakes send an agent of supervisor rank to act as assistant to a probationary agent? But that's not what I'm asking yet. First, Lippman just called his buddy Tog. How come?" Tog took her seat again, rueful resignation on her face. "You should be figuring it out on your own by this time, Ronny." He looked at her belligerently. "I'm too stupid, eh?" The anger was growing within him. "Tog," she said. "It's a nickname. Or possibly you might call it a title. Tog. T-O-G. The other guy. My name is Li Chang-Chu, and I am of supervisor grade presently working at developing new Section G operatives. Considering the continuing rapid growth of UP and the continuing crises that come up in UP activities, developing new operatives is one of the department's most pressing jobs. Each new agent on his first assignment is always paired with an experienced old-timer.
I see, he said flatly. Your principal job being to needle the fledgling, eh?
She lowered her eyes. I wouldn't exactly word it that way, she said.
She was obviously unrepentant. He said, You must get a lot of laughs out of it. If I say it seems to me democracy is a good thing, you give me an argument about the superiority of rule by an elite. If I say anarchism is ridiculous, you dredge up an opinion that it's man's highest ethic. You must laugh yourself to sleep at nights. You and Metaxa and Jakes and every other agent in Section G. Everybody's in on the Tog gag but the sucker.
Sometimes there are amusing elements to the work, Li Chang conceded demurely.
Just one more thing I'd like to ask, Ronny rapped. This first assignment agents are given. Is it always to look for Tommy Paine?
She looked up at him, said nothing, but her eyes were questioning.
Don't worry, he snapped. I've already found out who Paine is.
Ah? She was suddenly interested. Then I'm glad I ordered that other probationary agent to leave. Evidently he hasn't. Obviously, I didn't want the two of you comparing notes.
No, that would never do, he said bitterly. Well, this is the end of the assignment so far as you and I are concerned. I'm heading back for Earth.
Of course, she said. End of part 12.